Welcome to a series of brief digressions on my favorite historical figures associated with archery, hence the title Marcin's Favorite Historical Figures. These are short, bite-sized tales about individuals from various eras and walks of life, spanning the spectrum of wealth and spirit alike. My little chats are not meant to be comprehensive biographical or historiographical studies. Instead, they are intended as signposts for those curious and seeking inspiration in your own explorations and research. So, if you have a few minutes to spare, I invite you to join me for a fireside-style chat in Winning Paths. The king, his heart resolute, called upon his knights. "Where is my son, Charles?" They replied, "Sire, we know not. We believe he fights on." Then he declared, "Loyal companions, lead me into the fray, that I may strike but one blow with my sword." To ensure they would not lose him in the chaos, they bound their bridles together, placing the king at their head, and so advanced toward the enemy. The words of Froissart linger in the air like the final notes of a funeral dirge, carrying the weight of a moment frozen in the amber of time. John of Luxembourg, John the Blind, was not merely a king. He was a living paradox, a man bound to his mortality, yet untethered by it. Even in his blindness, perhaps because of it, he saw more clearly the truth of what it meant to lead, to fight, to meet the tide of inevitability with a steady hand on the reins. Born in the waning years of the 13th century, John came into a world shaped by power's jagged contours. The son of Henry VII of Luxembourg, crowned Holy Roman Emperor, and Margaret of Brabant, whose lineage carried the quiet steel of her ancestors, John's life was written into the epic of European royalty from the moment of his first breath. In 1310, not yet 20 years old, he married Elizabeth of Bohemia, her bloodline securing his claim to the throne. Yet, Bohemia itself, fractured and unruly, greeted its young king not with laurels, but with the simmering discontent of divided factions. It was no throne for a dreamer, nor for one content to be bound by the gilded cages of courtly life. John, restless and resolute, seemed to wear his crown lightly, as though it were a helm better suited for battlefields than banquets. Europe became his stage, not just Bohemia. A king, but more a knight at heart, he found his identity not in the politicking corridors of Prague, but in the clamour and chaos of war. By the time the 100 Years' War erupted in 1337, John had become a mercenary king of sorts, lending his sword and loyalty to causes that flared and faded like the fickle stars. His allegiance to Philip VI of France placed him on a path that would eventually lead to the fields of Crécy, where the fates of men were measured by the flight of arrows and the unyielding precision of the English longbow. Crécy. The name itself feels heavy, a battlefield steeped in more than blood, carrying the weight of transitions, of old ways faltering before the relentless march of innovation. The English, under Edward III, wielded their bows like extensions of will, their deadly arcs transforming the fields of northern France into a graveyard of knights and aspirations. It was here, amidst this carnage, that John chose to make his final stand, not with strategy, not with hope, but with the undying courage of a man who understood the moment's grandeur and its inevitability. Blindness had claimed him years before, an insidious illness stealing from him the light of the world. But what is blindness to a man whose vision lies elsewhere? On the morning of August 26, 1346, as the clouds hung low over Crécy and the murmurs of approaching doom swirled like mist around the French camp, John, unable to see the faces of his knights, spoke words that would immortalize him. "Lead me into the fight," he said. "Tie my reins to yours, so I may strike a blow." There is something almost mythical in that moment. A blind king, a tethered charge, a declaration of agency against the very forces that sought to diminish him. His knights, bound by loyalty and love, did as he commanded. The bridles were tied, a physical bond mirroring their unbreakable devotion, and together they rode into the tempest. Froissart's words capture the scene with a haunting clarity. To ensure they would not lose him in the chaos, they bound their bridles together, placing the king at their head, and so advanced toward the enemy. The charge was futile. How could it not be? The longbows sang their deadly songs, arrows falling like whispers of death, but John, blind and unbowed, rode forward, What must he have felt in those final moments? The rhythm of hooves beneath him, the cacophony of battle swelling around him, sounds sharper, more visceral than any sight could ever render. Did he think of his son Charles, lost somewhere in the maelstrom? Did he hear the cries of the dying and find within them a strange kinship, a shared defiance against the fading of the light? When the battle ebbed and the bodies lay strewn like abandoned effigies, John and his knights were found together, their bridles still bound. The image is almost too poignant, too perfect in its symmetry of loyalty and loss. The horses, too, remain tethered, a silent testament to the unity that carried them into the abyss. It is said that John's body was identified by the insignia on his armor, his blindness rendering his face an unknowing mask even in death. And so, John the Blind became a legend, not merely for his death, but for what it represented. The chronicles transformed him into a figure of chivalric idealism, a relic of an age when honor and courage could defy even the inevitability of failure. But to see John only through the lens of Froissart's romanticism is to miss the deeper truths of his story. His blindness was not a tragedy, but a metaphor, his final charge not an act of desperation, but one of profound clarity. As I reflect on his life, I find myself drawn to the questions he leaves in his wake. What does it mean to lead when the path is obscured? Is courage the act of facing certain defeat, or is it something quieter, something less grand, but no less vital? John's story resists easy answers, and perhaps that is its power. It forces us to confront the contradictions of what it means to be human, to fight, to fail, to tether ourselves to others in the hope that together we might transcend our own limitations. Crécy was more than a battle. It was a turning point in the way wars were fought, the longbow's dominance signaling the decline of the armored knight. Yet, even as history shifted beneath their feet, John and his knights rode into the storm, their bridles tied, their resolve unbroken. It is a moment that defies the cold arithmetic of warfare, a reminder that the human spirit is not measured in victories, but in the courage to act, to charge, to be. John of Luxembourg, blind and bound, saw more clearly than most. His life, his death, his legend, they are not just the story of a king, but of the enduring human spirit, the ways in which we confront our own darkness and find meaning in the struggle. His final ride was not about winning, it was about the charge, the tether, the refusal to stand still. And in that, perhaps, he speaks to us all, reminding us that sometimes the act of moving forward, blind though we may be, is its own kind of victory.